You can tell her, you can tell her anything. She's a real good listener. You can tell her anything.
All right. Yo, what's up? It's your girl, Father Longlegs. This is me, Daddy T. You know me, Teresa Lee. That's my name. These are very easy rhymes. I wish my name was cooler to rhyme, but it's not. But you're listening to You Can Tell Me Anything. It's the podcast where comedians confess something they want to get off their chest. Already my guest is laughing at me, and I
love it.
I can't wait to introduce him. You just heard him, but let me introduce him. He worked with me at Cracked. He's a brilliant director, has a bunch of podcasts on the Small Beans Network, which you should definitely follow and listen. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you're aware of that because a lot of Small Beans family have come on this pod before. Give it up for Adam Ganser. Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for doing
It's so
it.
fun to be here.
I don't know if it was someone like preemptively saying this, but I don't know if you know, like someone like I don't remember if it was a live stream or something, but someone was like, you need to have, or why don't you have Adam on your show? And I was like, oh, I will. Like, but it was like I was like, oh yeah, I'll have him on. But it was one of those things where I was like, I didn't know he wanted to do it. Okay. Like,
I have like 5 fans and they're very aggressive.
Because I don't think they meant it that way, but it came as like like you said no kind of thing, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm happy to have him. Like,
of course, I love it. Also, this might be getting into deep waters already, but like I've never branded as a comedian much, so I feel like most of my friends who are comedians, they're like, oh yeah, right. But they're thinking of I need to bring comedians on and stuff, and not like whatever I'm self-labeling as, which I'm not sure.
You're a filmmaker, director, or however you identify. Yeah. But that's an interesting point, because when I started, I was like, it's a comedy podcast, but I'm a comedy. No, I'm a comedian. So to me, I'm like, well, the goal isn't to crack jokes, because that's what we do on stage. So like the idea is like usually when you talk to comedians, like it's there's more to it. But I have in the beginning it was more stand-ups, and then I did branch off more, and then I love it. Like I've had directors on who are just directors, but generally I meet them in the world of comedy. Although I did have a director on who we met at like an Asian queer shorts block that we were both in. So our vibes are very different, but also the same. Like we obviously have stuff in common. So I think that when I say comedian, I mean me, but no, I'm just kidding. You too. But I always forget that when I say that, some people are like, I'm not. I'm like, oh, true, but you are. Like, you make comedy
things. The thing. Yeah, I have like 4 or 5 friends who I've said that to over the last 2 years, and they're like, dude, you're performing comedy content. What do you? Yeah,
you're
a
comedy creator. The labels.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, the labels. I guess it's just because you would probably introduce yourself as a director more, so then it puts people in other people's heads. It's strange. Just like I tend to say comedian because I think it covers stand-up and writing, but technically sometimes I'll say I'm a stand-up depending on the context. But then they might be like, I didn't know you, like I had someone hire me to do stand-up, and then like months later we're like, I didn't know you write. Do you want to write for stuff? And I was like, yeah, I write my material, but I guess people don't realize it translates.
I didn't download this. Right, like I wrote the jokes.
Slight label. Yeah. But speaking of intros, I like to start by asking the guests for a good confession, just so we can get to know you and start on a positive note. Is there something good you'd like to confess?
I would. So most people know that I have a day job right now that involves teaching college students.
Ooh,
out of college.
That's exciting.
Which I really like it. This last like month because it's all been on Zoom, right? Everything's on Zoom now. I'm watching people's faces more than I would normally be, and I've realized like, I have a lot more sympathy for students who like don't necessarily want to be in school than I did when I was in school. You know what I mean? I'm like watching. I'm like, yeah, I get it now. I understand why you don't want to be here, because this is frustrating and difficult. I get it.
In general, or being at home difficult?
I think both. Honestly, both. Like I you and I have worked for off and on at least for 10 years ish, right? And so, like, I think you look back at school and you're like,
wow.
School's stupid, kind of, like, not entirely. It's great in a lot of ways, but
no,
also
I see what you're saying, and I see
feels...
that people think that. I think that I tend to be the this is when I realize that, like, oh, I see why I'm the way I am. Like, whenever people are like, you know how this, I'm like, I do know how that, and I know how I'm not that, and I want to be like you, but I have weirdly attached to the structure of school in a very positive way that I know is not normal. I know you are familiar with this pod, and I generally am inspired. Inspired might not be the right word, but I was prompted to do this because of therapy. Like, I didn't grow up with like just knowing it was an option so much, and now that I go to therapy, I love getting things off my chest. So sort of the idea is there's something really nice in talking things out in a more in-depth way, especially as comedians or
100%.
comedy creators. So I'm curious, what is your relationship with therapy? Like, have you ever gone? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Just kind of what you think about it. No right or wrong answer. We've had the gamut of experiences, so
I've had so I haven't been officially in therapy until I went into some therapy after Cracked, after we left Cracked. I just felt like it was time to sort out some anger issues that I was having over a period of years. And it was, I mean, I really enjoyed the perspective of the person. It was good to talk. It didn't like fix much, but I mean, I don't know. I don't think I necessarily went to get it all fixed. I think it was more like brushing your teeth, right? Like it's like that kind of work. It's like a maintenance thing. I've had really bad therapy type experiences in my times with the church, because I have sort of I have a conservative background, and so like when I left the church, I left with somebody having made the suggestion to like sort of seek some Christian therapy, and that was very not constructive. Just kind of feel good stuff. That was like,
well, plus the idea of putting anything. Well, I was gonna say putting any qualifier in front of therapy that's like a slant feels like the idea is it's more of a neutral, but if you're going in with a bias. But that being said, therapists are human and they all do have biases, but generally I think they try not to let you know what they are so that they can be neutral. But if you go into Christian therapy, it's like, they're not going to necessarily, they're not necessarily going to respond neutrally if you're like, feel like God's not real, like, or whatever. Like, they're going to push you in one way or the other.
That's true. If you came with that one, they would not address that. Like, let's see if that's true. But I did want to go to Christian therapy because I wanted those kind of answers when I was going there. But I also found that, and like this is like sort of a larger critique of religion I have right now, like they were afraid of hard questions.
Oh yeah, that's
they were just kind of afraid of like, well, what if I'm just like kind of depressed and nothing's gonna fix that?
It's very scary. But I think that you're on to. I mean, you obviously as an artist, you understand that sometimes things are more complex than like question answer because
absolutely
you untangle things even in the way you make things. But recently I've just been thinking this phrase over and over, and I'm like, oh, this is, and every time something like, it's a simple way, but I feel like we were talking about right before we started about how I go off on rants, and I'm really trying to be more succinct. So I will try. But the thought I keep having is the question is the answer. Because I feel like so many people get in these divisive fights, even people who like each other. Like me and my twin sister, I've talked about, like, we are sorting out our differences. We obviously love each other, but we were getting to the point when we lived together where we just couldn't communicate, even though I know deep down we're like, we both want to. So it's like, obviously we're not doing it on purpose, but it feels like it. And what I realize is, what I mean by the question is the answer, similar to what you say about hard questions, is it's not always about finding the exact answer now, but if you keep asking questions, you'll start to figure out like, well, what is it I want to know? And then you realize you and someone across from you who seem to have different opinions had the same questions. And you just both answer it differently. And sometimes like someone, for whatever reason they're entitled to, might not want to know that's wrong just yet because they're not ready for the uncertainty. So they may see you getting to that place where it's going to like burst the bubble, and that's why they stop it. And so now I sometimes respect that when I realize like, oh, that person's not ready to hear the answer that they actually know in their heart, because that's why they're getting defensive.
I had to take a bunch of like sort of classes on how to educate adults before I started this job. And the one sort of through line about it that connected for me that I've sort of, it stuck with me is like, adults need to feel like they are in control of their own education. And like, if you're going to teach them, you can't just, this is the answer. You have to sort of let them think they're arriving at the answer, even if you've sort of prepared the experience for them. And I think that's most true about like deep things, self-realization things. People need to feel like they found it themselves.
That's really well said. I mean, I think that I'll even go so far as to say I don't think it's just adults. I think that there's a lot we can fix about the education system for kids. Obviously, that's like, once more, I love to ask too many questions, and then it starts to be like, stop, because then you're like, everything's wrong. But it doesn't mean you have to fix it now, but it's good to know where we're trying to go. Because you're correct, like, adults need to feel in control, to feel safe, but also children do too. But we don't necessarily focus on that so much, because a lot of times adults are like, well, I can keep my children safe. And then over and over you see them not being able to. So the reality is children are not as good at keeping themselves safe. So we do have like guardians in place and teachers to help aid them. But the goal has always been for a child to learn and then be an adult who can. But because we treat children like they can't, we skip over the part where they, like you said, are supposed to actually arrive at understanding how to feel safe. And then they grow up into adults with a lot of trust issues.
Right. And I mean, they never feel like they're empowered to like, oh, it's actually my job to make myself feel safe and educated. I mean, I of course I see all the different range of that as adults in a film school, but like some adults, they're like, I don't want to do that. Like, just tell me the answer so I can move on. Like, and a lot of those people, interestingly enough, are really obsessed with grades. Like, they're like, I really want to get a grade, like a good grade. And I find myself often saying, which is kind of a crazy thing to say as a professor, but it's like, who cares about your grade? Like, nobody's ever asked me at any audition or any film that I've ever made, like, what did you get in cinematography? They've never asked me that, and they're never gonna.
Yeah, I keep bringing my GPA out to auditions, and nobody wants to see it. And
I didn't even check my grades at USC until the end, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I did fine.
But see, this is what I love talking about stuff like this and dissecting it as adults, because I agree with you now.
Yeah,
I was that kid, and it.
Oh yeah.
But the reason I can see that was not because I needed to be the best or have the top grades. It was because as a child, I didn't necessarily have the resources to, I mean, I talked about this before too. It's like, I love my mom. It's not about my parents. They didn't, they were dealing with a lot, but the idea is like, if your parents don't have the full capacity to make you feel unconditionally loved and safe, you will feel unstable as a child. So to me, I looked for ways to feel in control, which was, okay, school, rules, grades. I can learn this. And then as long as I get the grades, I know I'm doing it right. And I get what I need, which is the validation and love. So as an adult, I realized, oh, that's stupid. I mean, I can see that I still did well and like to learn. But the reality is some classes that I didn't do well in, like science, because it wasn't as easy for me to learn, do. Actually, now when I think about it, I'm like, are some of my favorite things to think about, but because in school I didn't get the grades I wanted, I didn't pursue it. So the reality is like, as adults we can look back and go, oh, I was that person and I understand why they're doing it. But
me too. This is exactly what I mean when I say I have more sympathy for students who don't try as hard, because I think they know that. I think a lot of students who aren't trying as hard, they know this. They're like, I mean, I'm not saying that what you're teaching doesn't matter. I just don't care about it, and I don't want to.
They matter. And they get their validation from the... Well, you know what it is, though? I will say I didn't know. Now it seems obvious that I could have... Because I was obviously getting enjoyment out of extracurriculars like dance and choir more. But there was a piece of the puzzle that I didn't see which is that if I keep doing the things I love, it will be okay. So I felt like I had to do the things I love while doing things I didn't love well. So now I think the way that I don't know how I would do this. I'm not a parent, and like I need to learn more about myself before I can be. But I think the way to like maybe get them to see that is to offer them that feeling that they get when they get good grades through the work, which is probably what you're trying to do, but they won't realize it until it happens. So it's almost like you have to trick them into being like, you'll get a good grade based on how well this expresses you. And then they're like, okay, well, I need to find me. And then they're like, boo, and then they're like, oh, but it is tricky because until people learn it, they don't know it. And so like it's, I
think that's what Montessori schools are trying to do. Like, I don't know, I haven't been to one, but I think that's what they're trying to do is exactly what you suggested. And like, this is going to sound insane, but it's true. The best system I know of for that is video games. Video games are really good at like,
it out.
They give you a little sound and a notification and like, I feel great when you have achieved something, when you've learned a thing you want to learn.
You might be onto something. I mean, like Facebook's developing AR. I don't want to give them that power, but truly,
I don't either.
If I just feel like if they gave more like comedians and like not like Jerry Seinfeld comedians, but like people making content like us. Pair us up with people with the technology and let us fuck around for a bit. I think we'll make a more decentralized, fun world because I like the idea of AR. I don't like the idea of Facebook controlling it all, but like you're talking about video games, you could actually have some sort of built-in things where it's like, oh, you did something nice. Oh, you tipped, like ding, ding. And you don't get anything out of it except for like the AI is like, I noticed today you got up a little earlier and actually worked out. Good job. And you're like, oh, thank you. Like, okay, like nothing out of it except for a little bit of like a little hit of, dopamine.
Especially when you're a kid, like you can't underestimate how useful that is, I think. And that's what I mean when I say like school is a little dumb in some ways because it's not. I mean, and forgive me, I sound like I'm being negative. I love teaching. I love school. I just think that it doesn't match the way that people learn in like an infrastructural way, and that becomes more apparent when you're working there. Like I do think, for instance, like go back to high school. Why did I learn pre-calculus? I took pre-calculus. I can't remember any of it now, but why did I learn it? How is that a fundamental building block to my life? Now, it could have been if I went into the maths and sciences in some way. But like, why doesn't it branch out like after middle school or whatever, where you start to pursue concentrations even at that age?
That's interesting. Right? Some people do that. I don't know enough about the curriculum to because there's a part of me that's like, well, because not every school has the same access to things. So if you don't require it, you're really going to put whole areas behind. So I do feel like on that note, like, okay, having some minimal GED requirements makes sense.
Of course.
But I also think the other thing is sometimes you don't realize you like it till you take it or you're good at it. So
that's
people may not know. So that you do kind of like put them, like throw them into this little baby pool and see who swims well. And then you're like, you get out. Go to the big pool.
That's correct.
But
I took a very dumb class as a freshman in high school called Intro to Business because my dad was like, this is going to help you. And it was mostly like how to write checks and stuff. It was really dumb. It was very dumb.
I love that.
Yeah, you can't believe it. It was just me and a bunch of seniors. So I was
Trump
very like,
it? No.
Well, there's a part of me that like appreciated that my dad sort of made me take a class like that because you would never take it. No one would ever choose it. And you do learn some things, but on the other hand, it's like, shouldn't this be like somewhere in the math wing? It's like, we're doing like if you're a math person, then there's an intro to business class. Like if you're an English person, maybe the journalism class fits in there. You know what I mean? Just sort of.
Well, they do have. I mean, I was a pre-business studies minor just by accident because the registrar made a mistake.
Amazing.
And I literally, I actually took the class, but what happened was as I checked my progress like sophomore year, I saw it on there and I was like, what's this? And being the person that you hate, like kind of person who does things because for no reason but to achieve, I was like, well, that would be really useful to have. I've always wanted to have. So then I was like, let me look into what classes I need to take this. Oh, just a few classes at Stern. Well, Stern's a good school. Well, why not? I'll add this to my curriculum. But then I got it for literally. And when I asked, they're like, "Oh, it was an accident. You want us to take it off?" I'm like, "No, this looks cool. I'll do it. Sure, I'll take this."
But see, to me, that's you owning the education. Right? Like once you're at that point, you're owning the education, and of course, try stuff. I took a Taekwondo class in college. Don't know why, but I took one.
That's actually really. I've been talking a lot about animals and physicality, and even though those are the classes you think, oh, maybe easy credit or fun, those are the ones that actually build you skills because you're relieving stress that in college you have so much of. Like even when I was working really hard, I still am working really hard, but like out in the world, when we were allowed to be out and about, on weekends I would like to go dance. And now that I can't, I didn't realize how much I needed it, but I'll literally be cooking and then just start to, like, it happens. Like, it's how much I need it. And I think our bodies need to move like that. And I don't work out, so it's like I don't get it out that way. So I'll literally dance around my house like I'm at a club by myself. But I need it. And so that's what the clubs are great. For. And I mean, some clubs are also for people to meet each other. But what I realized was I get to meet people in work, like as a comedian. So I'm going to get the shakies out, you know?
Yeah, there's about a third of people at a dance club that like, no, I dance. That's why it's this and not a bar or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a real thing. There's a girl I used to go to LA clubs all the time with long ago when the Killers were a new band. That tells you anything. And like she really wanted to dance. Like that was like, don't fuck with this. I want to dance. So like, okay. And that's what she was there for.
Yeah.
She wanted to do that. And it was like, great.
It's natural. Well, I feel like speaking of sharing things, it's a good time to ask you, Adam. And I'm sorry if you guys can hear construction. It's been like that all week, so I would wait for it, but it probably won't pick up on the mic. But if you hear it, Adam, that's what that is. Now I can't stop listening to it. Adam, is there anything you would like to tell me?
I would. I think I might have just missed the boat on cooking at all. Like I might just not be able to cook much. Yeah. This pandemic was the perfect time for me to like, I'm going to figure out how to make a lasagna or something, right? Okay. And like, I won't do it. I won't do it. I don't know why. Like I do so much like Grubhub or Postmates or whatever. And like, it's not even like a work thing. Something about me is like, I don't want to do this. And I don't know what it is.
Well, okay. I want to unpack this because I love that. Yeah. And obviously you don't need to be a cook to be an adult. But what I like about this is that you said you missed the boat. So you're not coming from a neutral place of like, I don't like to cook or I don't want to cook. There was an element or a part of you that was like, I would, if this was easy, be the kind of person who can cook. So then like a part of you wanted maybe to be that. And then you're like, but not enough to do it. So I want to explain that part because that's really interesting to me. Yeah. Because it kind of relates to what you were talking about with these students who know where they want to go, but it's not maybe you think it might be rewarding to know how to cook, but you haven't felt it yet, so you don't know. Or maybe you really don't actually want to cook because it's not rewarding, but for other reasons, the society tells you that it would make you seem this way. Like, so I'm curious about this middle area. So
100%.
What makes you, first of all, I guess, why do you think you want to cook or need to know how to cook?
Absolutely. So I feel like a sense that like if I don't learn how to cook, I'm a man boy. Like I'm gonna be a man boy till I die, you know. So like there's like I feel like adulthood does require cooking, no matter what anybody says. Also it's cheaper and healthier, right? So there's like plenty of incentives. I sometimes wonder if it's that part of me that's like I'm not gonna listen to that new band because everybody's talking about them so much. Okay. I have that thing. Where like I'm not gonna go see that movie until
you don't want to be doing the thing you have to do because you have to do it.
And I want to be able to do it on my own terms. So that means sometimes I just don't do it. You know?
Oh, this is interesting. As a teacher, because I do kind of think like I think some people call it the ego and the it or whatever. And there's so many different forms of like. I just now call it my self family unit. It's strange, but sometimes I'll self-parent myself because I think the ego is more like the child. But you as the teacher and the student, I feel like a part of you is like, this is okay. I'm trying to put this in words because I'm seeing something interesting. So you as the teacher know that you have to arrive at it by yourself. That's how you see your students. So you don't want to give them the answer. So that's also why you don't want to give yourself the answer by just doing the thing when it doesn't feel like the thing you want to do. So you're waiting to get there. But there is also at some point a meeting in the middle where the student does have to trust the teacher and take that first step and trust. So there's two voices in your head right now, at least, right? One that's like, I want you to get here and here's what you have to do. And then the other one that's like, I don't want to do it that way. And then it's like, trust, like, which one of them has to give a little?
Yeah.
Or you have to rearrange your goals, because at a certain point it is just like me every day setting 5 alarms going like, I want to wake up on time. But then going, do I? Because if I did, I would like, and then I had to readjust. What is the goal? And then you can figure it out.
I got there with screenwriting, where like for many years at Cracked, I just wasn't doing writing on my own free time, which is something I needed to be doing. And then I tried after we were all laid off to like, I'm gonna write 4 hours a day, and like I would just sit there and dick around, right? And so finally I was like, I'm going to write 2 pages every morning.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that got me to do it.
First thing in the morning, because what it is it's actually the thing you want to do. And I know everyone's different, but I relate to this too, because I used to always think, I'll come home and I'll write. But never ever would it work. And then during the pandemic, I started waking up with the sun and just being like, I'm awake at a bad time anyways. And I was like, what if I just sat down every morning, that as soon as I open my eyes, don't even check emails and just write? At first it's weird, but what it actually is like, oh, I think my brain was like, I want to write. And it was waking me up to be like, write. And then I was well, I just can't possibly be why I'm up. And it's like, no, just do it. And then I was like, all right, let's see what happens. And then over time you're like, oh, yes, my body was literally going, hello, do it.
Yeah.
So when you want to cook, I do think a part of you, like, I don't think you randomly want things. It may not be that you want to cook, but that's why it's good to ask the question of like, is it that you want to cook, or is it that you want to not be a quote unquote man boy? And therefore, if that's true, are there other ways to achieve that goal? Or what makes you feel like you're a man boy? Like, so then you can start to like, well, you know what I mean? The question is like, is that a thing that is it because there's other reasons you feel like a man boy, but then if you show that you can cook, people can stop calling you a man boy?
So many. When I was 20, my dream life was to be married with kids and probably being a pastor of some church and owning a house, and none of that is part of my, none of that is part of my life.
But that was what you wanted when you're 20, but is it what you want now?
No, I don't, because I feel like I could get a lot of that if I really wanted to. So I don't really want that, but I think I wanted the trappings. I think I want to seem.
Or you also don't want to let down your 20-year-old self, but in reality, you realize it's not really what's good for you, and you are a complex person with all the ages you've ever been. So you're trying to honor all of these wants. But I think if you connect them all and realize like, oh, that kid learned something on their own, that they actually wanted something different, but still wanted some things, right? But figured out a better version of it. Then you can let go of the picture dream and go, what was it that they wanted? Oh, they wanted to be stable and successful. Oh, well, what does that mean now to me? And then you can figure that part out.
You would be a good teacher. You'd be good, because I like how you sort of saw a thing and then you connected it later, and it was like, oh, that was very organic.
Thanks. Those who can't. No, I'm just kidding. No, I like teaching, but I don't think I would be. Thank you, but I feel like I talk too much, and I've been told that by many people.
That's fixable in a classroom.
I do teach myself things, and I think it helps. Like I always think in French, the word for teach and learn is the same. And I think about that a lot because it's a slight subtle difference, but in English, because the way we say teach, it really feels like this thing that you give someone, and then learn is this passive thing. But then in reality, they're both very active. Like teaching, as I untangle that to talk to you, I had to do some work in my head. And then as I learn things, I have to do work. So they're both active, and I think it's a two-way exchange, but I don't think we look at it that way.
when I was in college, I can't remember ever spending any time working on an assignment in class other than like an essay, right?
Yeah.
But I've sort of started to shift to letting students work on their things in class because I think they learn it better. And I like my instinct was like, well, this isn't really what school's supposed to be like. You know, I'm supposed to sit there and this is what I mean. Like school has a sort of archaic things that you have to get over. Like I thought, well, I'm supposed to teach them stuff and like engage them in a conversation, but I tell them the information and they go do something. And it's like, well, does it really matter if they hear it from me or if they discover it in a room that I'm in to help them? Like, does it matter? And I think the answer is no. I think it's like whatever way they get it is good for me. You know, it should be good for everybody.
Yeah, because you didn't write I mean, some teachers do love to teach their own books, but it's still like they're taking what they learned and put it in a book.
Right.
It's delusional to think that it's not like, unless you're, I don't know, Socrates, you didn't come up with so it's like you're also kind of another vehicle of knowledge. So you're totally right. If they read it in the book or they learn it outside, you don't need to be like, I wanted to teach you, because it's like,
who cares? Like as long as they learn it. And honestly, the kids respect you more when they feel like they got something out of class.
Yeah.
Than when they hear something quotable. You know, like I don't. You had a bachelor's in screenwriting, right? So did you ever do any actual in-class film work? Did you guys ever film?
We had to take. Yeah, we had requirements to take, but it wasn't like we did it in the film department at NYU. So it was like there's like cross, because I think they're like, well, let's just, there's a department. So they would have film classes which is like the basic freshman year film students have to take, like sight and sound and things like that.
Yeah.
All the dramatic writing students also had to do that. But then they branch off where we go more into, I think they had to do some writing too, but we branch off into specifics like children's TV, 30-minute, 1 hour, like way more in depth. And they probably just stop and go more into technical.
And are most of those classes that are the screenwriting classes, are they mostly workshop? Is that what they do?
They're mixed. So we usually, I don't know if it's still like this at NYU, but it was like, we have a small group that kind of travels with you through all 4 years. And then there's other different classes with other people. It's a small program, but then there's like other electives you can take, like the children, the animated. But the core ones were like, you'd be working, it's sort of like a hybrid classroom, hybrid writer's room where you would learn things, but at a certain point you just have to be writing. So then we would do pages, but then sometimes we'd like do, study this type of scene and then this structure and then learn about dialogue.
And then write one. And then write one like that.
Yeah, and then include it in our things.
It's interesting to me because like film school was largely just projects and discussion. Like that's all it really was. And there's a part of it's like, if I was gonna just start film school over from scratch, I think I would probably have a lot more just sort of like, hey, you're gonna show up today and you guys are gonna make a thing that you started from zero and you ended by it being done.
Maybe
like, there'd be a lot more of that.
I could see that. I think I wanted to come out of school with more finished works, but to be honest, when I think about it, even the ones I did finish, like you just grow so much faster once you're out of school. So to me, I think kids can be really focused on trying to make something good or polished, and then they skip over their learning. So I think that's why film schools don't do that. Because when I really, really think about what I learned in film school, obviously writing is, you always want to you're like, oh, I'm going to be good. I want to get it out. But that's, you already you come to school with that. So what I really got out of it was being able to see a wide range of other people's work and watch them learn and grow.
Yes,
because as they learn something, you might see them learning something and learn it too, or you might see someone not getting something, and that helps you see where you have a strength. And
it's true, and yet, like when I would take directing class at USC, like I feel like people's goal there was to like show up and not need help.
Yeah,
like
they're like, I'm so good. I just want to show you
right.
I'm ready and get the degree, so I have the USC degree with my talent. It's like, you're here because you're talented. We know already, but there's things that, and I really think the learning comes from the peers, because it's like every year there's new movies and you watch them and you're like, oh, this is great. And it's not about one being better than the other. It's about the conversation of art with each other. And there's nothing better than watching, honestly, kind of shitty art, right? Students, it's not shitty, but like it's not done. that is where you learn the most, because you can see what someone's trying to do and see how they didn't do it well. And then you can learn, oh, if I was trying to do this, I would have to fill in these gaps and this, instead of like being like, it's going to look like this. And then it falls short and you don't know why.
And you don't know why. Correct. I think like once you've really gotten all that built up, you can start to have conversations with your peers about like, I see you in this work in this way, and I think this other part of you is hindering your work.
Yes, it's like carving a statue.
Yes,
I love that. I really notoriously don't like giving notes to people who don't really want them, because I can't. I just, when people are like, "What do you think?" I'm like, do you really want to know? Because usually I'm like, I like you and I already like who you are. So if you want me to critique your work, I'll be truthful about how well I think it's doing what you want. But when I was younger, I would just think, because that's what I want people to do to me, I would just start with that. And then I got some pushback. Like I had a friend go like, not very happy with me. And I could tell, because she didn't want to say it wasn't because I said I didn't like it, but I think she was expecting like, this is great, I like it. And I could just feel her energy switch. So then I started thinking like, I also spent a lot of time reading this and giving my thoughts, and maybe I will always ask now, do you want to know? Before I even bother.
Have to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also sort of a gauntlet you lay down, right? When somebody asks for notes and you're like, okay, well, I'll give you notes. They'll be extensive, and I just want to make sure that you're comfortable with that. Or like I can tell you what my general impression was.
Oh yeah, sometimes I'll say, what are you trying to get out of it? That's why now if I ask for notes from friends, I'll say like, this is where I am in it. Like if I'm like, oh, I'm on a like close to final draft, but I want to know if this makes sense, instead of like, I'm not looking for like change this character to a boy, like unless it's so glaring, like it's a little more like this is where I am, and this is probably what will be the same, but obviously let me know if something really doesn't vibe, but like I probably won't change this, but like if you really care, you
start to develop that sense of like being able to say, these are the things that I think were clear that you were intending, and these are things that are not. Yeah. And now, do you want to hear what I think you should do different, or is that enough?
Right. That's a good way to put it.
And they're like, yeah, sure. They'll always say yes. And then they, whether they like it or not, who knows?
But see, I think what you're talking about is something you learn in film school, and I think
I agree.
Being a comedian, like, and there's also a lot I didn't learn in film school that I had to pick up from. So like, it's not one is better than the other. Like I think I went into stand-up overly confident and had to be very humbled by like, oh, you just have to learn it doing it. But then people who I know as stand-ups who didn't have those environments sometimes have a hard time taking notes, like we're talking about, but they are better at like riffing on stage and having no structure. So I do think the peer evaluation and taking notes is a skill you pick up in school, because you respect your peers, and at that point nobody's anybody. Like no matter how arrogant you are, like the reality is everyone's in the same class. So if you really were ready to get an Oscar, you would. And
you wouldn't be here.
Yeah,
You'd have
so
the Oscar.
It does kind of help. Hopefully, like you respect your peers more and respect their opinions, and see over time how different their work is, where you're like, I'm not even competing with you. Like I don't ever feel I'm competing with my stand-up peers or writer peers, because going through school, you're like, you're the vampire guy. Like you literally like, I see everyone getting good at their thing, and it's all so different. I don't even need to be in their space,
That's true. I mean, I often tell students like, hey, it is very competitive, because they need to be motivated to perform, because that's an issue in some of the schools I've seen, where they're not really like, they're like, yeah, I'll just kind of do a half-ass effort. I'm like, you can't do that, man. That's not going to happen. like that's easily weeded out. But I think you're right. Ultimately, like, I've never felt like I was competing with any of our friends to make content, because I never felt like I was making the same content as them.
Yeah.
Not really.
And if they tried to make what you do, you already know it won't be as good, because it's not you. So it's like.
Right. I also think it's interesting about comedy that you like whatever element you put in the room sort of creates a different comedy sensibility. Like that's a real, like I felt that very sharply in that world more than I did in like film world, for instance.
Well, film is like more one director, right? So that they guide the whole thing.
Well, even a classroom full of directors, you know what I mean, or even like a writers group, for instance, that's not in comedy. The sensibilities are allowed to sort of be more variable, and I think it's because comedians instantly sort of like riff with each other and find this is what makes us both laugh, and they make that, then they begin to make that.
Yeah.
And that's interesting about it's actually kind of the fun thing about comedy. It's why it's important to keep changing the room and keep adding new voices to it.
Yeah, so it doesn't get stale. Well, you just described something interesting, because I love that. I never thought about it that way, but that two comedians are finding the thing that they both make or laugh at, and most of the time, it's the thing that actually makes them uncomfortable, because where you laugh, it's like the edge, right? And it's the edge where it's like we know the boundaries and we respect each other, so nobody feels unsafe. So here we are talking about like feeling of safety, empowerment, but also the question being the answer, because you're kind of like asking questions like, what do you think of this? What do you think? Oh, we both laugh at this because we don't know the true answer. Like punchlines are kind of like a fill in the gap of like, this isn't really what it's going to be, but we both know like this situation's weird. So I came up with an answer that's not real, and you laugh at it,
It's totally true. And like you have an instinct with a friend who's in comedy to like, what's the weird thing that nobody has said yet? You have an instinct for it. You know what I mean? Like you just get there. And then like, also, it's also kind of like Voltron or something, right? Where it's like this part and that part actually equals this other thing. It's like, oh, cool.
Yeah, I love that. That's a good way of thinking about it. Some people do think like, oh, I'm the best. But I think if you're doing a lot of like, I think if you're a headliner, you start to have to believe it. You have to, because you get told that. And then it's like, if you're like on stage being like, I suck, it's like, a few people can pull that off. Like a few people, not in a bad way, but like Mike Kaplan is so great, and he's also so humble on stage, but is great and knows it. But he's not on stage being like, fuck you. He's like, always like, oh, thank you guys for coming. And then he does something amazing. So like people can do that. It's just over time, I think it's like comedians always know the truth. And if they don't want to admit it, then they fill it in with lies. So
that's interesting.
Well, someone who's like a headliner who gets too big, like Jerry Seinfeld or whatever, like. Yeah. I'm not going to argue that he was never a great comedian, but I could say that he maybe is overvalued now because now he's a celebrity, right? He's not being paid for his comedy. He's being paid for his celebrity. Doesn't negate his comedy, but he knows that deep down. So if he's going around and someone might come for him, then he will just, overcompensate with like, oh, well, things are too PC now anyways, which is like, that's a lie. And you know it. So
that's true. Yeah. There's no courage in that answer at all. Yeah. Jerry Seinfeld, I think of as being so successful that now he's isolated.
Yeah.
So he's not as challenged to make interesting stuff. Like, even though, of course, this person's disgraced himself. One of the things I liked about Louis C.K.'s show is that there was a recurring segment where he would hang out with the comedians and like they would process something.
Yeah.
That's what they would do. Like, it'd be full of middle-aged, angst or whatever. But that still felt very real to me. Like, that's a thing that comedians generally do.
That's the reality that I think a lot of people who don't sit with that feeling, I think in black and white and then want to defend, like, the reality is life has the gray area, which is like Louis is an example of like, just like, I think some people want to either just like him or hate him. And then people who want to still like all the stuff he does have to ignore all the bad stuff. Whereas like the reality is you could just look at the truth, which is that he did some bad stuff and that just changed your opinion of him. And also he's done some cool stuff that helped you. And that doesn't make you a bad person if you liked or were helped by his comedy. But I think those are the parts that people can't quite sit with, which is like, oh, does this make me bad because I think this? And so those are the questions for, like, I think that are going to help you get to your answer instead of being like, oh, let me just jump onto this like train of Twitter trolls or whatever, I
also kind of believe that with some obviously restrictions, it's good for people to accept the earnestness of their past if it was honest. Like if you honestly liked Louis C.K., and now you're like aware of what he did and you're like, he's bad. You don't have to say you never liked him, right? Like you don't have to go back and retcon history. You can easily go back and say, well, I genuinely had this experience. Is that because of a flaw in me, or is that because we didn't know this, or both?
Yeah, you're talking about learning. You can
allow
your brain to learn and change.
Right.
But I think we sometimes believe that as adults, we're fully like, there's no moment where you actually are like, done learning, ding, like done cooking, right? And you're an adult. But somehow, because we can look back like 10 years and go, well, clearly I was dumb then. But you can't look back on yesterday and go, I was dumb then. But the reality is like your brain's always growing. So obviously, like you can look back and say you changed. I think the problem people get stuck on is the pattern. So I really think we're in a world where people do take advantage of empathy, like abusers do, where they'll say sorry, but they don't mean it. And there's no real way of knowing until you observe over time if they repeat a pattern. So most of the time, people like that, like Louis included, is constantly repeating a pattern, doesn't really show that he's actually trying to change. So for someone like that, it's like, oh, we're not saying like, oh, so you have no redemption. It's just like, yeah, but it's someone showing their ability to grow and change is different from someone who's repeating a pattern and just getting you in a cycle, So it's like, that takes time to figure out. And that's why I think it's not about canceling people, because then there's no time, but it's about allowing for gray area, but also as people do bad things, like slowly you can change your opinion. Like you don't have to all at once change it, but.
No, 100%. I don't know what the right answer for anybody who is in a boat like Louis C.K.'s to redemption is. But I do know that fixing your life after a mistake like that is going to involve some big changes, like a lot of big changes. And returning to where you were, you're never going to return to where you were. Like you have to return to a new place that's based out of new motives. And that just takes so much time to get there.
Yeah, but I would even argue that this is where I think the idea of like the comedians filling it in with a lie comes in, is because I would argue he was never there where he was. Like that
could be true too.
A mirror, right? Like we didn't know he was, well, some of us knew, like, but people didn't know he was doing such like awful things in a way that was so unapologetic and unashamed. And he had a different image. So actually he was never that. Like he was never that great guy, because
that's a good point.
The whole time he was like that. So he wants to get back to where you think he's that. That's the lie, because he's not like, I can't wait to go back to the time where I wasn't, I didn't have the urge to expose myself. He's like, I can't wait to go back to the time when I was allowed to expose myself and I didn't get caught.
Yeah.
So
you're absolutely right. Because he definitely seems to have like made self-awareness a kind of cushion, right? Well, I'm self-aware, so like, which is sort of like what you're saying about people taking advantage of empathy, because I think that's the Gen X way of doing that, right? It's like, well, I'm self-aware about this thing that I'm doing that's terrible, so that's okay.
Yeah, it's tough because sometimes I don't think people are good or bad. I do think some people lean into one or the other, but like having my own unstable moments. And now being in a relationship with someone stable, I find that there are times when I'm like, oh, am I like, I don't think I am, but sometimes I'll be like, oh, am I like my abusive ex, when I'm like crying and I'm like, oh shit, like, could he think I'm being manipulative because I'm crying? And then I'll have to step back, and then I'm like, it isn't about me. Because in that moment I want to be like, let me explain. I really feel this, but I'm like, no, nothing I say will, like, the point is, instead of being like, how does he see me? I have to go, if I'm not like a selfish person and if I have empathy, I need to say, I don't care how he sees me, how is he feeling? And if I feel, whether or not I'm right or wrong in my feelings, if I feel I could alleviate suffering or whatever, or help the situation, then I do my part. That's empathy, right? Like there are times when I'm like, I really want to be comforted, but I can tell that this is hard for him or it's a lot, and I'm right to need comfort. Like it's not right or wrong, but if I'm empathetic and I can see I'm pushing it, perhaps I can understand it's not his job, even if he wants to help. And I can calm down, take a step back, and maybe like go outside or whatever and calm myself down. So it's like that, those little moments are the hard work. That's the lie, right? Yep. Like I would lie to myself and say like, well, I didn't do anything wrong. But the truth is they don't owe you anything. Like you're the only one responsible. And people can help, but there's always room to like suss it out. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. It makes me think about like a thing I've thought a lot about over the last 10 years is like, how do you forgive somebody who doesn't really apologize? And I think that's who Louis C.K. is. He's a guy who didn't really apologize.
I think you
but
realize
also,
you
a lot of
don't
people
need
like
them to. Well, it's tough because I used to be like the kind of person who's like, I want to be vengeful forever. And then I started trying to fix myself because I realized, I keep getting these situations. And then you hit a point where you're like, God damn it, I have no more anger and I forgive everyone, but that's not fair to, like, I don't want them to know.
I shouldn't have to. Yes.
But then at a certain point, you're just like, I just like, they're really in pain. Like, that doesn't excuse it. It explains it though. Like someone like Trump, when I see him,
100%.
when people ignore him and he's still throwing a tantrum, I just see how sad he is. It doesn't excuse it. Again, I'm not sympathizing with him or telling you to feel bad for him. It's just the truth. Someone who treats people that badly does not feel good, and they can't help themselves.
Yeah, they can't feel good if they're doing that.
And they want to, and they think that if they make you feel bad, it'll feel good. And people try to help, and you can't. And at a certain point, you just go, like, I am sorry, I can't help you, but actually, you can't make me feel bad because I like myself, and I don't think anything you say is true.
And like I don't need to buy into your structure. Like, that's the thing with Trump is like everyone has to buy into his grid of how the world works, and you don't have to do that. Forgiveness, is ultimately like somebody has to pay a price for that. Somebody has to, like it's not a zero sum.
But you
it's
already paid it. I think people forget that when someone does something bad. That's what I realize is like, I mean, I do think people should seek justice when they can and when they want to, but I don't think people have to. And I hate when people are like, this happened to you, you must, because it's like, you know what? It happened to me. And if you actually believe it happened to me, then you believe that I suffered and it happened. So if I think the best way for me to suffer less is to forgive and move on, then you should respect that, because
I agree.
It already happened and I was the one that paid for it. And so, you know what? Like, I don't need them to pay for it. Like, I already paid it. Consider it done.
And I think that's really admirable in some ways, because the truth is, if you don't forgive somebody when you're in a place of pain, you will ultimately continue to feel that pain.
Yeah.
Like that's the difficult thing about it, is like, even if they don't deserve it or they don't ask for it, you're still going to feel the pain of it.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to sort of think of forgiveness as being independent of what they do.
Yes.
And that's hard to do. I don't know how to do it well, but that's what I've come to in the last 10 years.
It's a little bit like they gave you something, like a hot potato that they didn't want to hold because it hurt them.
Right.
And you're holding it and you're waiting for them to take it back. So that's why, so you can let go of it. But you realize you can just drop the hot potato and walk away.
Yeah. Well, you realize like you can hold it till it cools. It's going to get cool.
You can just drop it though. You don't have to hold the pain. Right. Because what happens a lot of times, it'll be like abusers will lie and tell you you're not good enough, things like that. So you'll hold on to it waiting for them to apologize and say, I lied, you are good enough. But you can also go, I am good enough, and that's it. Like, I just don't really need them to tell me, and it's fine. Yeah. Oh man. Okay. Wait. You made me think. I wasn't gonna share this, but I think it's kind of funny and related. But it was something that happened in therapy, because this week I was in therapy and I was telling my therapist about like some like kind of shitty stuff that was happening at work, and then she was like, some people just need to be, or she was like, some people just need a spanking. And I immediately was like, no, I shook my head. I was like, I don't think so. And then she doubled down and was like, she like tried to like backtrack and said, no, I mean like an emotional spanking. And I still was like, no, that's not the thing. And then she was like, what did she say? Oh, cause she knows that I like, my parents, like Asian parents, not uncommon, but they hit their kids. But she is white and very lovely, but I think she sees it as like either a joke or like, oh, this is so bad, but like didn't see it as like, I'm me and it's like complex and there's a gray area. So when she said that, I was like, no. And then she said, well, some people are just so bad that they like need to suffer to learn. Like people don't learn without punishment. And I just kept being like, I disagree. I know we're out of time, but I just need you to know this is
lodge this in the minutes.
This is how we ended up here in the first place. I really don't think that will make me feel better. I don't think it will make them feel better. To be honest, I think they are suffering. That's why they need to get rid of it by causing pain. And I wish there was more power I had to make it stop, but definitely don't think hurting them is going to make it stop. So it's like, but it was really interesting moment, because she really like, I could tell she meant to make me feel better. That was her goal.
Right.
In that moment, her goal wasn't to say the truth, but she knew it would make me feel better. And then in my goal in that moment was like, I'm just kind of trying to actually untangle this mess and figure out how I can feel better. And I realized it's not to hurt them.
But I kind of like in some ways how the psychiatrist or psychologist is like or therapist is like an externalized version of your inner monologue.
Huh, yeah,
you know
true.
What I mean?
That is like an ego thing. I have thought, but then I then think it through and I have the conversation. I go, I don't think so,
Yeah, that's really what like you went back to sort of an orthodoxy of sorts, right? Like a belief system, and you're like, that's not how we're gonna address the world. But you flirted with the idea, and then you're like, no, I'm not gonna do that. That's how a lot of us do pain management. Period.
Yeah,
right?
True.
Sort of like, okay, I have this pain. Am I gonna lash out, or am I gonna be passive aggressive, or does it need to be confronted, or do I have a sort of deeper truth I can lean on that helps me get past it?
Yeah, I love that. It is like having a full conversation with yourself instead of just listening to the first line. Like the log line. It's like, don't just, if you like the log line, read this full script. I don't know. I'm trying to put it in.
Or the whole synopsis or whatever.
Yes, because it's usually not what you think it is. There's always a twist.
A lot of times I think therapists are just sort of forcing us to continue the dialogue past the first couple lines, right? Which is what you were saying. And I that's a really valuable service.
Yeah, true.
Because I get in patterns where I can't escape the initial problem or the initial 3 things that I think.
Yeah, you can't get out and you just think negative statements. I think that's why I like the idea of questions, which to bring back to as we get towards the end, your confession of cooking. No, because this is all to me very relevant. So I want to see if this conversation changed anything in the sense of the question, right? So it's like, okay, I'm never going to cook. So I think my question first is has the goal changed? Is the goal to cook? Is the goal to be a man-child? Is the goal to just accomplish something that you wanted to do and you're mad that you actually realize you don't want to do it, but you kind of don't want to be a giver-upper? Like, has the goal at all changed about the situation?
I think if I'm being really honest, I think the only reason I feel I need to cook is to impress a person I would date.
Okay.
I really think that's the only, I don't feel like, man, I wish I could cook for my own benefit. Like if I, aside from money and health, like if I just didn't have those problems, I would never cook. And I wouldn't feel even a little bit bad about it unless I met some woman who was like, what are you doing, man? I feel like that's the only thing.
Oh, okay.
Really.
This is great because I feel like I'm seeing now we're getting out of the binary because now I'm like,
yes,
we've opened a whole world of options.
Yes.
And I'm not just saying like, oh, learn skateboarding to impress a woman. I'm saying like within this realm, which you can always do, but I'm saying within the realm of cooking because like, let's not open it too big. Let's still start with this idea of the home. She comes home and you want her to see your space is taken care of. There is a world, and I could totally see a lot of women who would like this. If you have a very nice kitchen, which you don't have to cook in, you have a nice kitchen, she starts hanging out, you have all the things, she can cook. It's very comfortable to cook in a nice kitchen. You can even do groceries. You can cook together. There are ways to get all those feelings you want her to have, feeling like she's home, feeling like you know how to take care of yourself. The toilet paper is stocked. There's a trash can in the bathroom. A lot of men don't have that. And the kitchen is clean and nice, but you don't cook in there. That's why it's so clean. And it's like, that is very impressive when she comes over. And,
great point.
There's a lot of ways you can get to these things. And I think that it wouldn't take away. And in fact, the person you like, because you're not the kind of person who likes to cook, probably is also not that person who needs you to cook. And
probably not. Her
personality may be similar to yours where she wants all those like image things like you, but genuinely you connect on a different level. So you can have the facade when your friends come over of a nice kitchen and you're both like, hey, we order takeout or whatever,
This is very helpful. I feel like the sort of slightly deeper level on this question is like, I seem to run into a lot of women who their love language is sort of being like served, like sort of acts of service, which is not how I feel or experience love. But I do think I want to find ways to communicate to people like in that space, and cooking's such an easy one that seems like it should be enjoyable. So I do think I'm missing that piece. You know what I mean?
But
like where I want to find some way.
You can do to nurture someone. But I think I think that's really interesting if you tend to find, because there's patterns and that means there's something about them that is trying to address a part of you that like you're repeating. So then to get out of the loop, it's like slightly, there's something you maybe you can learn from someone who needs to be served, but it might not be that you need to be more serving. I don't know what it is. You know, but like,
good point.
Yeah. It's like, I often for a while was dating emotionally unavailable people, and I was like overly attached and thinking like, well, I'm not the problem. I'm ready to commit. But what I realized was I don't think I was ready to truly love myself. So I was dating people who didn't love themselves. And therefore when they treated me poorly, that felt right. Even though I was like, but I want more. I wasn't giving myself more because I wouldn't have dated them in the first place if I believed. Yeah. So there's like things you can learn, but again, you can't rush it. You have to just learn it.
Did you move out of it? Did you get out of that?
I did. I had a very hard fall and hard lesson to learn it, but.
Okay. So there was a, this was so bad I had to change.
Yeah. Moment. If you don't learn the lesson, eventually the lesson will school you, but.
Right. Eventually, you're gonna learn it.
Yeah. But then where I am now is I feel like 100 miles better. Where I'm like, there's so much I learned. So I don't mean that people need to suffer again. Like I know it sounds like that's what I'm saying. I think on the other end, you realize you don't need to suffer. But I only know that now. So hopefully, people who know that can add to the good, and we'll eventually get to this place where people don't.
I needed to suffer. Perhaps you do not.
Yeah, I don't think like people do. Yeah, I don't think they
that's
do.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. I haven't really. So far have been pretty hard-headed. So suffering has been part of all my big learnings so far. But I hope to be better.
Yeah, there's no. I mean, that's the part of life, right? If you got to a place where you were totally done, like you would literally be dead. I mean, like it would be at that point. A chariot of fire
would pick you up. Yeah.
At that point, because I've thought about that. Sometimes I'm like, am I getting close in a way where I'm like, slow down, I'm not ready. Because there's times when I'm like, I'm sometimes so at peace where I'm like, I don't need anything. And I'm like, well, no, but you're going to live for a while. So you really should be like working and making money.
That's an interesting belief. So like you feel like once the lessons are done, that's the end of the life?
I get a little scared I'm getting too close, to be honest. And that's probably a quarantine thing because I'm not being stimulated. But I am starting to get to the place where I'm like, obviously my ego is still like, make the money, be famous, be successful. Right. But deep in my heart, if you ask, like, if someone was like, would you take a chance to like, I don't know, let's say like, here's a huge $1 million deal or whatever, and, be on TV, but you'd have to do something against your belief system. I couldn't say yes right now. So I think there was a time when it would have been hard, but that scares me because I know in my mind, I keep saying my goal is to get those things. But if I can't say yes, that means it's not really my goal anymore. And that does scare me. Oh. Because my goal, I think now is just to be at peace with myself, which I'm not ready for that. I want to still be, I have years. Like, I mean, I'm sounding way like, I'm totally not perfect and not enlightened at all. It's just that I'm more aware of the ego, but the ego still drives sometimes, but I'm very aware of it. Oh yeah.
My ego is always going to try to get back in the driver's chair. Yeah. Like that's just lifelong struggle. Mm-hmm. I'm just fascinated by this idea of like, we learn the lessons, then we depart.
Because there's nothing. Do you really believe that? You can stick around and heal people. But then you will be suffering. The more you heal, I mean, the reality is it does take a lot out. Sometimes I find myself wanting to reach out and help people, and then I feel drained. But I don't think it's my job. And I think that's also a part of me I haven't learned, which is like probably I'm not healing all of myself, and that's why I'm trying to heal others. So even that is like not as noble as it sounds. It's me ignoring a piece of myself. So I think...
I think service of other people, like helping other people, needs to check some selfish box. Mm-hmm. Like I'm just not I don't believe in altruism in the sense that people usually mean it. And I think it's fine if it does.
Well, everything's selfish, but if you believe that we're all one and we're all in the universe, then helping someone else is helping yourself.
Right, exactly. Right. And at the very core, at least that's true. And also like, you would ideally want to use your talents for that purpose too, right? Like, isn't that really the dream?
Yeah, because I think some people, the old comedy was like hacky, where it's like you make fun of someone to get a laugh. And if you thought that's the only way and you want to be funny, you would lean into that. And it's like, as a student, like if you told me that, even if I didn't like it and I wanted to be a comedian, I would probably try to learn it. But now I realize, I can make people laugh by being myself and being nice, which is doesn't sound very funny, I know, but it can work. You just have to find the middle ground funny thing that's funny to everyone that doesn't hurt or whatever. And then adjust when it hurts. Like, don't be like, well, I'm funny, so you're wrong. Just go, oh, okay, now I can adjust to a new thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's even been that recent where being mean wasn't funny anymore. I feel like it hasn't been funny for quite some time.
Yeah, but there's the definition of mean changes. Like an example. Yeah. Okay, I'll say this example, and then I want to play a quick game. But
sure, yeah.
I was writing a like kind of a satirical review for this website, and they're very like inclusive, queer friendly language, which I am as well. So I wasn't like, this wasn't a bad thing, but they're also coming from being on my side, so it didn't feel like defensive. But they edited, because I was talking about being bisexual, so my personal experience, there is some binary to it, even though I understand that there's more than two genders. But in one of the jokes I made was talking about like, oh, dating men and women. So they were like, we totally get your experience, but like, is there a way you can write this so that it acknowledges or includes other genders? My first thought was like, ugh, but then it was like, oh yeah, sure. And then I pushed it to be, I made a joke that I thought was funny, but then I asked my boyfriend, because I was like, is this mean? And I would say, instead of listing genders, I listed types of people. And I said like, even short men or whatever. And then he was like, I was like, is this mean? He's like, kind of. And I was like, really? And I wanted to be defensive, being like, it's okay to make fun of short guys, because like, I don't have a problem with them. I just don't like how they make me feel tall. And then he was like, well, no, because it's like they don't, like short guys don't want to date tall women, and then they lash out and they're mean to you. And so I'm also, as I said that, I was like, oh, okay, I'm talking about, that's the gap. That's the lie. They feel bad, therefore they make me feel bad. Doesn't mean I can make them feel bad. So I realized like, okay, you're right. So I changed it, and then I liked what I came up with much better, which I like listed a bunch of random things, and then one was like, and tall people, because I was like, okay, everyone like that. And the sentence ended up being funnier, and to me I was like, oh, see, we found it. But I had to drop the ego, the part where I was like, I don't think this. And it's like, it doesn't matter, because if someone reads that and they don't like it, like, they think you think that, so why don't you just try a little harder and make it funnier?
That's great. I love that. What a cool story. That's really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. I love. This was such a great convo. I knew this would be a fun one, because I feel when we worked at Cracked, we often get into philosophical conversations
all the time. I still like. One of my like. I think of it fondly, but I also like can't believe it happened. Is like the time where I was like, "Hey, you and I should go like eat and like have a chat, right?" Because like we really by the time you got to Cracked, we weren't all doing hangouts as much as we used to. Mm-hmm. And I was like, great. So we set it up, and then like I went to the wrong one.
That's
I went to the wrong one.
I remember that. Oh.
And you like had to wait for an hour and a half while I drove across town. It was so dumb. But it was very fun. So yeah, this reminds me of the old days.
Yeah, man, I miss Cracked. Well, the game it's not really a game, but it is a game. I end with a fun thing that's not related to the confession, but this is called 3 Rules. It's very simple, just because we've been talking so much philosophy and, with government and all these restructuring. So it's just, if you could start your own, like, ville, island, whatever, town, in the real world, so, like, the element of suspension of disbelief, but in the real world, so no magic rules. But let's say that everyone who lives there wants to live there. So they come in knowing these are the rules, they'll do their best to follow it. What would be 3 rules that everyone has to follow? It doesn't have to be government. It could be simple. It could be whatever.
Whew. Okay. My first one would be, if you can't operate out of good faith, wait. Wait
I like
to do
that.
the thing.
Okay.
Whatever that is.
Hard to enforce, but how would you enforce it, or just more like general golden rule?
Again, good faith is the kind of thing you can't enforce, except for in like extreme legal cases. I think you can do it, right? Where it's like, well, that obviously, like for instance, I think some of these Trump lawsuits that are happening right now are bad faith, and I think it's okay to say that it's bad faith and just to dismiss them for that reason. And that is a legal requirement. I just think that in general, that's a really key ingredient to people feeling good about the world they live in, whatever that is, so good faith. Yeah,
that's good. That's setting a high value system that everyone subscribes to. I like that.
Right. I think the second one would be, if it doesn't immediately impact you, if you're not immediately impacted by this decision or rule, then you will have less input than the people who are.
Okay, and like in voting.
You know? I'm thinking more like I'm honestly thinking more relationally than like government.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So, like for instance, this is a controversial point.
Yeah, give us an example.
I'll give you a great example. So, like a lot of I come out of a conservative culture, and I think a lot of people, the values there that have been most contentious have been gay marriage and abortion, both of which are things that, to me, I think it's really easy to just be like, even if you don't agree with it, you don't have to do it. And like that should be a really fundamental part of how we decide this. Is like, if they're not forcing you to do it, then like your input should be limited on whether it should exist or not.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, that has always, there's so many logic holes to that it does feel like that comes out of that emotional fear, right? Because like to make something illegal doesn't make it go away. Just like killing people has been illegal for a long time and people still do it. So it's like
for obvious reasons. Obvious reasons. Like
but then killing, if they really believe it's killing a baby or whatever, like not to get into, like there's so many, arguments for it, but their solution is not to teach people or to have them understand. Their solution is to make it illegal. It's like, well, killing people is illegal. So do you really think this will work, or do you think this is just like a big shebang to do theater show so that
right? Like if there's any pro-life people that listen to this podcast, first of all, welcome. You unicorn. I can't believe you're here.
Honestly, I say that, I'm not pro-life. I say I'm pro-choice, but sometimes I'm like, I'm going to start saying that because I would have a family by now if I was living my dream, getting paid a proper wage, and, had the access to healthcare to solve my childhood trauma earlier, and therefore provide for a family and fall in love and raise a beautiful child, or ugly, doesn't matter, till 18 years. Honestly, if you don't let that happen, you're not pro-life, because I would be having a baby. Okay? I'm one of those. I would have had valid. It. Okay?
Yeah.
Give me the money and resources.
I mean, I think pro-life needs to be expanded to like improving the lives that are currently exist.
Yeah, the minute the baby's out of the womb, they're like, well, we don't care about you anymore. It's like,
functionally, yes.
They need you. That's the time.
No, you're right. I mean, functionally, that is absolutely true. That's absolutely true. So those are two rules.
Okay, I like that.
I think my third one, and this is just like a pet peeve I've had over the last 6 years.
Have a fun one.
Well, I don't know how fun it is,
okay.
But like, I think jurisdiction should not matter for most things. So like, some things like getting a divorce or whatever, sure. But like, if I commit a crime, right? Like, let's say it's in Los Angeles. There's no reason why I have to be tried like in the immediate area that crime happened. And like, why can't there just be a lottery of like jurisdiction within a certain range? And like, here's another better example. Jurisdiction is a huge part of how we're deciding voting stuff.
Yeah.
And the principles of jurisdiction are how our entire election process works. Right?
Yeah. Gerrymandering.
Like, why the fuck
really
does Iowa matter so much? Fuck that. Like Iowa's just a state, and yet they have outsized input on everything that happens to us nationally because we once long ago decided they're the first ones in the primary. And to me, that's a jurisdiction problem.
Yes.
It's like, no. Do a lottery. Every year, do a lottery. So like this year, California's first and Kentucky's second and so on and so forth.
It's like a draft.
So that people you can't set up on things like that and game the system. Because a lot of people are using those kinds of rules to game the system, not to create justice.
They were created to supposedly help, but they backfired. Like, it's interesting, like, jokes aside about, like, the NFL drafter, it's like, the reality is, when we see that, we're like, oh, well, they're all part of the same league, so they're on the same team. But it's like, well, are we not part of the same country? Are we not part of the same team?
Exactly.
So that's the, like, I guess not to keep harping on the lie, but now that I started, I'm like, oh, I see it everywhere. It's like, we never agreed on that. People do feel like they're against each other. And it's like, well, then is it a lie? Like, maybe before we move on, we need to figure out why we feel that we're not all on the same page. Like, as a country, I feel like that's a very important thing. Like, if we establish that our goal is to make this country great and help, that means all the citizens, then it'll be easy to move forward. I think that might be a lie in some states.
Yeah, I mean, or certainly if it was true, it isn't now. Like, I don't think that with social contracts that truths are eternal.
No, and that's really the thing they talk about in is it Rousseau, right? The social contract.
Yeah.
It's
that's Hobbes.
Oh, okay. But Rousseau talks about animal or trading safety. I think for it's safety for freedom, and it's he does it in a better way than I'm talking about it. But he does go into the idea of like nobody actually starts from the same place, but you kind of find a collective consensus, and that's kind of what you're talking about. Like as you move further away, the consensuses might change, but there isn't actually a line, right? Borders are fake. It's not like you cross a line, you're like, now I believe that I'm allowed to be gay. Like
right, exactly. Come on now.
Yeah, so it's more.
Or drugs are legal now. Mm-hmm. No, they're not.
So your brain kind of subsidizes, like fills in the hole with the lie, because in order to live in that state, you have to be like, well, I live here, so I believe this only because I want order, because I want other people to believe this thing I believe, and it's like, well. That's a good solve for now, but maybe what we need to do is over time figure out what's causing these inconsistencies, and if there's any merit to like trying to see another side or them seeing your side.
I also, and I know that any conservative who listens to this is going to blast me for the rest of my life.
I'm full of conservative listeners. Me, Teresa, and a bisexual Asian comedian, all conservative listeners.
I would ban originalism as a way of doing logic or investigation in my country.
What is originalism?
Originalism is the
in the Bible, or?
Well, no. So that's like the one text that I would not have a problem with originalism, like for instance, the I Ching or something like that. A religious text, I completely understand why we're doing originalism. A contract text like a government constitution, originalism's insane.
Yeah,
completely insane. And the principle, for those of you who don't know what it is that we're trying to get back to the intended meaning of the authors
like Constitution,
as the only way to interpret what it means. And like I'm all for authorial intent as a criteria for meaning, but like there's so many problems with it. Some of them like are economic and inherently racist and blah blah blah, and also it's just like not viable. It's not viable. It's stupid. Why are we going back to what they decided in 1776? Because that's the contract?
Yeah, how are you okay with new iPhones and not cool with women getting jobs?
And like that's the crazy thing is like, so like originalists will omit certain things like Thomas Jefferson's statement that like we should redo this every 20 years. Yeah. The Constitution needs to be redrafted.
Because he understood how he changed over his life, and he's probably like, I'm sure I have blind spots, which he did, but he knew that and was like, I would be down to change them once new information is presented about how I'm wrong. Like that's how those founding fathers thought. Doesn't excuse some of the like their slave owners, but like I think a lot of them truly believed at the time that they would be willing to change given information, and that's why they pushed for change. And I think the intent, if anything, would be for a society to keep getting better, not to like stay the same. Like
I would ban it. I guess maybe I'd put like a statute of limitations, right? It's like if we're in a lawsuit or like some kind of a criminal enterprise and originalism spans back longer than one lifetime, then I'm like, well, I don't think we need the original intent anymore. After that,
because it's not the people who are being governed. It's like
right. None of the people who are under this law agreed to it. So like, I mean, sure they did by being here, but like, I never signed a document that said, I'm going to abide by the 1776 interpretation of the Constitution.
Yeah. Wow. We may need to get a virtual meal and talk more, because you just started more thoughts that I feel like if I start, it'll go forever. Because when you talked about being here, like being born is the ultimate, like being born in a different country with different rules, you're all of a sudden, you may not be able to leave.
Right.
But if we all believe that people are all, deserving of life, which I do, and I think most people deep down do, but sometimes they'll like cognitively dissociate from it, then you would also realize that's so ridiculous.
Right.
Because they didn't choose to go there. But
your reality should not be determined or interpreted through the lens of things you did not control.
Or you should have an ability to adjust it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, obviously there's certain realities like, wealth and skin tone and stuff that you can't change them fundamentally until you're an adult, if then. But those things should not.
But those are both things that you've
everything for your
described
life.
that are actually second tier traits, right?
Yes.
They only have meaning because of the way we've put in balance, or what's the word? We've not proportionately
invested values.
Yes,
yeah,
we've
put value
disproportionately put values in those, because in reality, if we're really talking about survival, like money's a concept. Money's not real. Yeah, like animals don't do that, and like money is actually designed to make it harder, I think, to survive. Because if I was kicked out on the street tomorrow, I would have to be like, gotta get a job, gotta get money. Where it's like, if I was an animal, I'd be like, gotta find shelter, gotta get food. But I can't just break into
food, water.
Yeah,
that's
but
what you think.
I would suddenly be like, gotta leave town to find food, because anywhere here I'm stealing. So it's like, doesn't make
sense. That's a crazy. Right.
As an animal, you could just be like, here's a sandwich, I will eat it. But it's like, you can't.
Like private property is an interesting concept. Also, because like, I mean, I don't want to sit here and give every wacky thing that I've toyed with in my brain. I know. But private property is like a weird agreement that we all have. Mm-hmm. Not that I think it's bad. Certainly, when I enjoy my laptop or this microphone or whatever, it's great that somebody can't just come take it. But on the other hand, especially when it comes to wealth distribution, it just becomes it becomes counterintuitive to how human beings operate.
Yeah, I agree. I could talk about this all day, but I'm going to wrap it up because if I respond to that, I know we'll be down another hole. Yeah. But I like this conversation a lot. So if you guys enjoy this, let us know what you think. And how can you follow Adam if they want to get at you?
You can follow me on the Twitter at @TheRealGans with a Z. Also on Instagram, if you're that kind of weird pervert, go ahead. You can follow me there. Also, you can see all my podcasts on the Small Beans Network. I have 3 of them with your old friends Michael Swaim, Abe Epperson, and Maggie Mae Fish, respectively. And I have a website for my film works called ganserfilms.com. You can check that out. Then one day, maybe a preview for a movie. Who knows?
Hell yeah.
Maybe it'll come.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Put it out there. And you can follow me at Larissa T and follow this podcast at Tell Me Anything Pod. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.